That is, oh my god, that is beast. What are they doing?
I don't know.
I think we're getting abducted by aliens tomorrow, Dad.
There's quite a few, though.
You don't see that very often.
No, of course you don't see it.
So what are they doing?
You thought it was like the differential pressure between the inside and the outside?
Wait, who?
That's a bit too complicated there.
Who did?
There, I saw a UFO, and it went down the river, turned right at the United Nations, turned left, and then down the river. It wasn't a helicopter, it wasn't a balloon, and it was so near.
And it looked what, sort of round, white,
just
luminescent, and silent.
Silent, and it looked dark, like black or grey in the middle, and had white lights, just looked like light bulbs, you know? Just going off, on, off, on, off, on, blink, 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 blink.
Tornado outbreak, this time just southwest of Oklahoma City. At least 4 people are reported dead, with dozens more injured. Search crews are combing through the damage tonight, looking for survivors. Emergency management.
You getting all this? The World Trade Center?
That's the same thing.
What is that? It's over there.
We're going to pattern what we're doing today after a formal congressional hearing. And first of all, we have with us Congresswoman Darlene Hooley, and we have Senator Mike Gravel. We have Congresswoman Carolyn Kilpatrick, and we have Congressman Congressman Merrill Cook. And we are all retired. So among us, we have 80 years or more experience, but 80 years just on the federal level. And Roscoe and I were classmates. We have 20 years each. And I have to tell you, it is our commitment today, as if we were part of a hearing in the House of Representatives, it's our commitment to listen through objective ears and to ask the kinds of questions that we think that the American people would like us to ask, so that they can become better informed, because obviously there's going to be a press on this. And we would like to make the public more aware, and we would like to have a hearing that could lead possibly to legislation or policy making. So if we're objective, if we're businesslike, and we stick to the issue, I think we're going to have a very, very interesting week. And right now, though, we get to swear in the first two witnesses.
Just very quick opening remarks, and then the first panel of witnesses will sit
Oh,
right
all right.
after us.
Okay, first we will have our opening remarks.
And initially, I think Dr. Edgar Mitchell will be brought in on Skype.
Good morning, Dr. Mitchell.
Good morning, all to this meeting. And I'm speaking to Florida. Unfortunately, it's conflict, so be with you week, but for all my potential to talk to about this subject, I am a former astronaut, flew to the moon on Apollo 14, and so I have a little bit of off the Earth experience. But also I grew up near Roswell, New Mexico, a ranch boy, and the so-called Roswell incident of 1947 occurred when I was a senior in high school and getting ready to go off to college in the East. So, and I have been interested in this subject for many years, but let me set up the basic credentials. For the first time in our human history, our technology has shown us how huge our universe, some call it a multiverse, is, with billions and billions of galaxies and galactic clusters and stars, and many of them, and we know we've identified a few, many of them so far, that possibly could have living systems on them, living beings, and we have a history that I'm aware of, particularly starting with the Roswell incident, but even long before that, that we have been visited by aliens, visitors from different star systems and different planets. And of course, if we continue our endeavors, we will in due course be able to go outside our solar system as well. At the moment, our technology is not allowing us to do that, but in due course, we will be able to do that, I'm quite sure, and we must, because our sun will only last a few more billion years, and we're even doing things to it that cause it to be life on this planet to be unsustainable at the rate we're going by using up non-renewable resources and so forth. And so we have to rethink about this whole issue of our being here on this planet at this point in time, and how do we continue our life here, and how do we continue being stalwart citizens of planet Earth and keeping our civilization going, and eventually be able to leave our planet and go somewhere else and investigate somewhere else, because we're not alone in the universe. They have been coming here for a long, long time, it seems. The evidence would suggest that. We've been having visitors for a long, long time, perhaps hundreds, maybe even 1,000 years. There's some that would even say that the pyramids, both in Egypt and in South America, that aliens aided us in building those, and that seems to have a reasonable ring to it. But in any event, we're not alone in the universe, and we're only now beginning to get enough evidence through our science and our understanding of the way the universe is put together to recognize we really are alone, and that we can in due course, just like others have, it appears, they can come here, we can go there. And so I think we'll have a lot of testimony here today regarding that fact, and I urge you to listen to it, and let's open this up to the larger picture and acknowledge, yes, we're not alone, they are here, we can go there, and in due course we will. And for the last, I've been very interested in this for the last 16 or 17 years on the basis of speaking about it publicly. And since I went to the moon 40-some years ago, and my colleague Gordon Cooper also had an incident when he was at Edwards Air Force Base as a duty officer, had a UFO land while he was on duty. So there's a number of us that have had these types of experiences to say, yes, we're not alone, we have been visited, and let's go forward in understanding this phenomenon. And I hope you have a good week, and I'll stay abreast with you as long as I can. Thank you.
Thank you, Edgar.
Good morning. Good morning. I'm Paul Hellyer, former Minister of Defense of Canada, and a long-time participant in politics and governance. Over many decades of service to the Canadian people, I have come to understand and appreciate the importance of open, transparent government, and the power of truth as antidote to the many afflictions the body politic is heir to. The true currency of the 21st century will not be gold or silver or a basket of currencies, however useful they may be. It will be trust. Without that commodity, progress and right action are undermined and delayed. There is only one way to regain trust: find and tell the truth. Whether to your friends or family or to the citizens of nations, I believe this citizens' hearing serves that purpose. And like my friend Edgar Mitchell, I say without equivocation, we are not alone in the cosmos. We have neighbors. We should try to get to understand them and to cooperate with them. Thank you.
Good morning to the committee. I'm Stephen Bassett, Executive Director of Paradigm Research Group and an activist. In November of 2011, the White House issued a statement, formal written statement, through their Office of Science and Technology Policy that can be found on the internet quite easily. This statement had 3 sentences. One, I paraphrase, there is no evidence whatsoever of any life outside of our planet, or that any life outside our planet has contacted or engaged the human race. And thirdly, that the United States government, there is no credible information that it has been hiding any information about that from the American people. With all due respect to the White House and to the President, this statement is remarkable for 3 reasons. 1, it is false. 2, it is indefensibly false. But 3, and this is where it's very important, it is the first time in history that the executive branch has put its position on this matter in writing. And so there it is. That is the position of the White House. What is going to take place this week, we hope, is that a portion of the massive amount of evidence confirming the alternative to that statement, that we are in fact being engaged, is going to be presented to the American people, presented to the political media, to the Congress up the street for their consideration. We hope that the, how would you say, comparison between what is shown here and the White House's position will prompt the political media to begin to go into investigation mode, not simply to record what is going on, but to ask very difficult questions, the obvious questions of the obvious people, individuals that are known to be involved in this issue in various ways. We also hope that the Congress, which has not held a hearing on this subject since 1968, will consider this issue worthy of hearings within the House and Senate. And I can assure the House and the Senate that for every witness that appears here this week, there is 5 more behind them, and then 5 more behind them. Hundreds of individuals, many serving in our government, serving in our military, including with top security clearances, prepared to go before Congress and testify to the kinds of evidence you'll hear this week, which confirms what Edgar Mitchell said. We are not alone in the universe. We are being engaged now. The government, for national security reasons, withheld that from us during the Cold War, but the Cold War is over, and now it's time to move forward. Thank you very much.
As co-chair of this hearing, I'd like to make a brief statement. I think it was about 33 years ago, I was camping in West Virginia on a mountain 4,000 feet high. I got up in the middle of the night and went out, and I just couldn't believe what I saw. The stars looked so darn close, it looked like I could reach up and touch them. And there really was a Milky Way. I can't see it here. There's too much pollution. There's way too many lights here to see the Milky Way. We're just one star, a fairly mediocre star in the Milky Way. If the Milky Way was the United States, we're a fairly mediocre star somewhere in South Georgia. And there are a million other galaxies out there, a billion perhaps out there like ours. And you have to be very arrogant and very presumptive to believe that this, I'm a scientist. I got my PhD 66 years ago. And you have to be very arrogant and presumptive to believe that this is the only place where life exists in a universe this large. So I'm really looking forward to the testimony today. Thank you all very much for being here.
So I'd like to acknowledge we're running about 13 minutes late. If we could have Ms. Howell, Mr. Dolan, Mr. Friedman, and Mr. Cameron come forward. And in a moment, I have the distinct honor of administering the oath. And gentlemen and Ms. Howell, if you'd like to repeat after me. I do hereby affirm that I will tell the truth
that I will tell the truth
and nothing but the truth
and nothing but the truth
to the members of this committee today.
to the members of this committee today.
Thank you. I believe we're scheduled to begin with Mr. Dolan.
Esteemed members of the committee, thank you for having me. I'm a researcher and historian on the matter of UFOs, particularly as they relate to U.S. national security policy. I just have a short statement here. The UFO problem has involved military personnel around the world for more than 60 years, and it is wrapped in secrecy. Because this subject is so widely ridiculed, it's important to stress why it's worthy of serious attention. Stories of strange objects in the sky actually go far back in time, but from the 1940s to our own era, military personnel from the United States and many other nations have encountered unidentified flying objects. Visually, or on radar, or both, sometimes at close range. These events happen not scores of times, but hundreds of times, perhaps thousands. Sometimes the encounter was nothing more than a solid radar return of an object moving at an incomprehensible speed, performing impossible maneuvers. Sometimes it included the violation of sensitive airspace. Often it involved the dispatch of one or more aircraft to intercept the object. At times, crew members have claimed to see a metallic disc-like object, sometimes with portholes, sometimes with lights, frequently engaged in what appeared to be intelligent evasive maneuvers. In a very few cases, it appears to have involved the military retrieval of a UFO. In a few others, it involved injury and even death to military personnel. And in a very large number of recorded instances, military personnel who encountered UFOs were adamant that they did not see a natural phenomenon. This is clearly a serious development, and it has been treated as such by those groups charged with maintaining national security. The CIA, the NSA, and all branches of military intelligence have historically received UFO reports and discussed the matter as something of serious concern. And yet, the military and other branches of government have created the fiction for public consumption only that the UFO problem is nothing to be concerned about, certainly not the result of little green men. We are fortunate that starting in the 1970s, the U.S. Freedom of Information Act began to help researchers learn some of the truth that lay behind the facade of propaganda. We learned, for example, that some U.S. military analysts initially feared that the Soviet Union might be behind the flying saucer wave of the 1940s and 50s. They studied this possibility but rejected it. They also rejected the possibility that these were secret American technology. And indeed, options quickly narrowed. Either this was something real and alien, or it was something conventional, but as yet unknown or unexplained. Already by the end of 1947, a contingent of analysts at the Air Technical Intelligence Center, ATIC, at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, believed that UFOs were extraterrestrial. And by the summer of 1948, that team prepared what they called an estimate of the situation, stating the extraterrestrial hypothesis. The response, the team was dispersed and reassigned. Yet, thanks to FOIA and the courage of a few senior officials to go on the record, we have a collection of statements about UFOs that are so numerous as to be impossible to mention all of them here. But a few might give you an appropriate flavor of what I mean. Here is one from General Robert B. Landry, Air Force aide to President Harry S. Truman. Landry says, in an oral history interview given about 40 years ago, "I was called one afternoon in 1948 to come to the Oval Office. The president wanted to see me. I was directed to report quarterly to the president after consulting with Central Intelligence people as to whether or not any UFO incidents received by them could be considered as having any strategic threatening implications." Landry went on to say that he continued to brief President Truman in conjunction with the CIA quarterly for the rest of the Truman presidency. That's no less than 16 briefings. We might want to know why a man as busy as President Truman was, why he would take the time out of his schedule to have so many meetings about UFOs. And yet we have no official transcript or record of those briefings. This is a statement from a top secret 1948 Air Force intelligence report called Analysis of Flying Object Incidents in the U.S. Quote, "The frequency of reported sightings, the similarity in many of the characteristics attributed to the observed objects, and the quality of observers considered as a whole support the contention that some type of flying object has been observed. The origin of the devices is not ascertainable." And just two more quotations here I want to give you. An Air Force intelligence report from 1951 relating to an aerial encounter by a U.S. fighter pilot. Object described as flat on top and bottom and appearing from a front view to have round edges and slightly beveled. Quite a bit of detail there. No vapor trails or exhaust or visible means of propulsion, described as traveling at tremendous speed. And one more quote from the early years, this one from a former head of the CIA, Roscoe Hillenkotter, speaking in 1960. "Behind the scenes, high-ranking Air Force officers are soberly concerned about UFOs, but through official secrecy and ridicule, many citizens are led to believe the unknown flying objects are nonsense." Now, how much clearer a statement should responsible citizens, academicians, media, and political leadership require before demanding to get some reasonable answers as to what is going on behind the scenes in relation to the phenomenon of UFOs? Because the problem certainly did not end during the 1960s or 1970s or 1980s, but has continued to the present day. During the summer of 2002, just outside this city, over the town of Waldorf of Maryland, dozens of witnesses reported an incredible scene. Multiple jet fighters chasing multiple large, unknown objects that were of blue and orange coloration. All the witnesses, two of whom I interviewed personally and several of whom spoke to national media, described the amazing performance and capability of these objects. The Air Force itself admitted that it had scrambled F-16s to investigate unknowns, which it had also admitted it had tracked on at least one of these objects on radar. We also learned that the UFO simply disappeared from the radar. The Air Force conclusion was that it could have been, quote, any number of things. Now, perhaps we might like to know precisely which things. What blue object can descend at an 80-degree angle, stop, reverse course, and accelerate away from two F-16 jets near the nation's capital in post-9/11 America? Might be an interesting question to ponder. Over Chicago O'Hare's airport, in November 2006, same kind of situation. A dozen United Airlines employees, including at least one pilot while on the ground, saw a hovering disc-shaped object below the clouds. It then accelerated away so fast that it punched a hole through the cloud. United ordered its employees to silence, but one of them reported the event anyway. After denials by United and the FAA, both agencies were forced to acknowledge that indeed those people had made UFO reports. And again, we might ask, what might this have been over one of the busiest airports in the world, and why the steadfast silence and denial? These are only some of the better-known recent cases. There are, in fact, an overwhelming number of them. The two largest websites for collecting North American UFO reports, the National UFO Reporting Center and the Mutual UFO Network, have a combined total of well over 10,000 reports every year. Every year. Now, clearly, many or most of these would turn out to be something prosaic if they were given an adequate investigation. But go through some of these reports. Many of them are truly incredible, and many of them have indeed received follow-up investigation. They are unexplained, and at least by our conventional wisdom, unexplainable. The combination of astonishing performance, powerful statements from selected senior officials, and unremitting silence and dismissal by our political establishment point to a problem. This is not merely the problem of cognitive dissonance. It is the problem of a political system in which the wheels have fallen off the machine. It is imperative, in the name of science and responsible public policy, that we get those wheels back on and begin a genuine, open investigation of this phenomenon. We demand and deserve answers from responsible officials who ought to be in the know. And if they're not in the know, we all need to investigate and find out just who is. Thank you.
My name is Grant Cameron. I'm a private investigator. For the past 38 years, I have attempted to focus on what the highest levels of the U.S. government, military, and intelligence agencies know about the UFO phenomena. I'm the director of the President's UFO website. As Steve Bassett mentioned, the Obama administration has come out with an official statement stating there is no ET evidence for an interaction with ETs, and there is no cover-up. What I would like to do based on my years of research is present a few pieces of evidence which show that this statement, written by a low-level White House staffer, is ill-informed and not true. Mr. Dolan pointed out that President Truman had been briefed for 5 years orally on the subject of UFOs. That does not appear in the official record. I'd like to add that Truman on video does make a statement stating, yes, we discussed it at every conference we had with the military. There were always things like that going on, flying saucers and other such things. In 1969, the U.S. government officially shut down its official UFO investigation, stating that there was no evidence that UFOs were extraterrestrial, and therefore they were out of the business. If this were true, the government would have shut up and allowed the subject to fade into history. This is not, however, what happened. Only 3 years after shutting down their program, the U.S. Air Force, at the direction of the Secretary of the Air Force, contacted 2 documentary film producers who signed an official film contract at the Pentagon to do a documentary on UFOs. They were provided with a number of films and pictures, including a film of extraterrestrials landing at Holloman Air Force Base, of which they used 8 seconds in the final production. They were given another film marked Top Secret that was never returned and is still in their possession. The documentary was funded with $250,000, and they were asked not to source the funder of the money in the credits. A CIA agent was present through the entire production, and as Linda Howe can testify, she saw a letter to one of the producers from President Richard Nixon thanking him for his cooperation on the project. Former Senator Barry Goldwater wrote extensively on UFOs, such as in 1975 when he wrote about his friend General Curtis LeMay, who refused him access in 1964 to the Blue Room at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, where alien hardware and bodies were rumored to have been held. Goldwater wrote, "I made an effort to find out what was in that building at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, and I was understandably denied this request. It is still classified above top secret." As chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee, Goldwater continued to answer UFO letters, stating in one letter, "This thing has gotten so highly classified, it is impossible to get anything on it." In another letter, Goldwater wrote, "I have no idea who controls the flow of need to know because, frankly, I was told in such an emphatic way that it was none of my business that I've never tried to make it my business since." And finally, Goldwater wrote, "I have been interested in this subject for a long time, and I know that whatever the Air Force has on the subject is going to remain highly classified." Those waiting for the president to stand up and say ETs are here should know that that event occurred on June the 27th, 1981. Steven Spielberg stated that after the screening of E.T. the Extraterrestrial in the White House Theater, Reagan, quote, "just stood up and looked around the room, almost like he was doing a head count. And he said, 'I want to thank you for bringing E.T. to the White House. We really enjoyed your movie.' And then he looked around the room and he said, 'And there are a number of people in this room who know that everything on that screen is absolutely true.' And Spielberg added, 'And he said it without smiling.' If you check the files of the Bush Library, you'll find nothing on UFOs. However, if you look at my files, you will find an audio of President Bush during the 1988 campaign being asked about UFOs, in which he says, 'I know some. I know a fair bit.' Likewise, I have a video of Vice President Dan Quayle stating, 'The alien situation is very interesting. We literally spent some time looking at this.' In April 2001, I asked Vice President Dick Cheney if he had been ever briefed on the subject of UFOs while he was on the Diana Reeves show here in Washington. Instead of Cheney stating that there were no credible ET evidence, Cheney replied, 'If I had been briefed on that subject, it would probably be classified and I wouldn't be talking about it.' Even President Obama has said things that run contrary to the statement put out by his own White House. This might be because neither he nor anybody in his office saw the petition on the ET question put in by Steve Bassett, despite the fact that over 12,000 people signed the petition addressed to the president. During a visit to Roswell, New Mexico in 2012, President Obama referred to the White House, to the Roswell crash, saying, 'We're going to keep our secrets here.' This raises the question, in light of the statement put out by his office that there is no ET cover-up, what secrets is President Obama referring to? Then, during a White House tour, President Obama anticipated a question that actor Will Smith's son, Jaden, wanted to ask about the reality of extraterrestrials. When they arrived in the White House Situation Room, the president said to Jaden, 'I know what you want to ask. You want to know about the aliens. I can neither confirm nor deny that extraterrestrials have visited the Earth. But if they had, and if there had been a top secret meeting on the subject, it would have occurred in this very room.' Then there is the story of Area 51, covered by 19-time Emmy Award-winning investigative reporter George Knapp, who has spent years covering the story. Knapp stated that he has over 24 witnesses who tell bits and pieces of a story of a captured live alien and extraterrestrial spacecrafts that are being back-engineered on the Nevada test site. He has also revealed during interviews that he had a discussion with Senator Howard Cannon shortly before his death, and that Howard Cannon basically confirmed to him that he had talked to Goldwater and the stories were true. Knapp stated that 6 of his witnesses were threatened, which succeeded them from stopping them from going on camera. Finally, In July 2012, Chase Brandon, a 42-year veteran of the CIA, was a guest of the 2 million listeners of the overnight radio talk show called Coast to Coast. His words on the ET cover-up were clear as he referenced material he had seen at CIA headquarters. To quote Chase Brandon, "I absolutely know, as I sit here talking to you, that there was a craft beyond this world that crashed at Roswell, and that the military picked up the remains of not just a wreckage, but of cadavers. 100% in my heart and soul," said Brandon, "Roswell happened. There was a craft and absolutely cadavers. I don't know where the stuff is, but I know that Roswell happened." Thank you.
Thank you for inviting me here. As a retired nuclear physicist who has been studying the evidence about UFOs since 1958, and since 1967 has given well over 700 lectures in all 50 states, 10 Canadian provinces, and 18 other countries, I have reached 4 major conclusions. 1, the evidence is overwhelming that Earth is being visited by intelligently controlled extraterrestrial spacecraft. In other words, some, underlined 10 times, some UFOs are alien spacecraft. Most are not. Don't care about them. 2, there is no doubt that a small number of people within governments, both in the United States and overseas, have been actively covering up the truth about these visits. There really is a cosmic Watergate. 3, there are no good arguments against these conclusions, only people who haven't studied the relevant evidence. And 4, flying saucer visitations and the cosmic Watergate represent the biggest story of the millennium. And I should say that I prefer the term flying saucer because all flying saucers are UFOs. Very few UFOs are flying saucers. All great-grandfathers are men. Not all men are great-grandfathers. I'm interested in the flying saucers, not the UFOs. The basis for these conclusions: A, there are at least 5 large-scale scientific studies which provide substantial evidence. These include Project Blue Book Special Report number 14, the largest study ever done for the United States Air Force, covering more than 3,200 cases with more than 200 charts, tables, graphs, and maps. It is quality evaluation, cross-comparison between unknowns and knowns. The official press release lied about the data. I'll document that in a minute. It is almost never referenced by UFO debunkers. Dr. Carl Sagan, we were classmates at the University of Chicago, claimed there are interesting UFO sightings that are not reliable, and reliable UFO sightings that are not interesting. But there are no cases that are both reliable and interesting. This statement was not backed up by reference to data, but is directly contradicted by the Blue Book Special Report 14 data. It was found that the more reliable the case, the more likely to be unexplainable. United States Air Force Secretary Donald Quarles, in the very widely distributed press release when the 1955 study was completed, flat out lied. It's a strong statement, and I'm sorry to make it, but it's true. He stated, quote, "We believe that no objects such as those properly described as flying saucers have overflown the United States. Even the unknown 3% could have been identified as conventional phenomena or illusions if more complete observational data had been available." The fact of the matter in the report that he was talking about is that the unknowns comprise 21.5% of the cases, completely separate from the 9.3% listed as insufficient information. The 3% number was a lie. Furthermore, a statistical comparison of the unknowns and knowns showed that the probability that the unknowns were just misknowns was less than 1%. It must further be noted that the press release did not give the title of the report or the company that did the work, Battelle Memorial Institute. If they'd given the title, surely some newsman would have said, "Hey, what happened to reports 1 through 13? had never heard about them. The correct answer, had it been given, would have been that they were all classified. It's a very valuable source of information, this report. It's funny how the debunkers never talk about it. Another primary source of valuable data, which should be of interest to you all, are the congressional hearings of July 29th, 1968, which included testimony from 12 scientists. The most important paper was by Dr. James E. McDonald, professor of physics at the University of Arizona. He had talked to 500 witnesses, but he presented 41 outstanding cases, including multiple witness radar visual sightings, sightings by pilots, by astronomers, by meteorologists. He noted physical trace cases, of which by now more than 5,000 have been collected by Ted Phillips from 95 countries. They get dull. Same thing was happening all over the world. Saucer is seen on the ground. It leaves, they find physical changes. Happens here, it happens there, it happens everywhere. 1/6 of those cases involved reports of small beings associated with the craft while it was on the ground. I was the youngest contributor to those, and I think the only survivor since then, to those hearings in 1968. And I was the only one without a PhD. That might tell you something. I'm not sure what. The proceedings, incidentally, are still available online. One of the contributors was Dr. J. Allen Hynek, chairman of the astronomy department at Northwestern University, and for 20 years, United States Air Force scientific consultant to Project Blue Book. His book, The UFO Experience, A Scientific Inquiry, should be required reading by anybody who's going to talk about flying saucers, especially negatively. According to another source here, according to a special UFO subcommittee of the American Institute of Aeronautics and Astronautics, world's largest group of space scientists, 30% of the 117 cases studied by the University of Colorado, government-sponsored study in the late 60s, and discussed in the Condon report, Edward U. Condon, could not be identified. And yet the headline said, scientific study shows no UFOs. Totally untrue. There's a 2-volume report called The UFO Evidence, which has loads of data, hundreds of cases that couldn't be identified. There's also the Cometa report from France, which goes into numerous excellent officially involved cases in France. There are a dozen PhD theses about UFOs. One of them demonstrating how poor the press coverage has been. I haven't seen one about coverage by the scientific community or coverage by the political committee. That's another story. Anybody need a PhD thesis topic? There's 2 good ones. Also, a third one, the will not to believe on the part of scientists. It's a sickness, a disease, if you will, infecting people who think they know all there is to know and don't. A really bad example of bias and ignorance appeared in Astronomy magazine this month, May 2013, by Dr. Phil Plait. He does a blog, The Bad Astronomy. The title of the article, believe it or not, is The Science Behind UFOs. It's a cover story. He somehow manages to mention none of the 5 large-scale scientific studies that I've just talked about, or any of the 5,000 physical trace cases, or any multiple witness radar visual cases, or abductions, nor advanced technology studies at national labs and in industry showing trips to nearby stars in reasonable round-trip times using fusion propulsion are feasible. I worked on fusion back in the early 60s. And to give you a form of reference, every star in the universe or multiverse produces its energy by nuclear fusion. That's what H-bombs are all about. And a good demonstration of the atom and the UFO together, if you will, is that in a very short period, we managed to go from a 10-ton blockbuster, World War II, 1945, took a big B-29 to carry it. That was in 1944. In 1945, the first A-bomb 15,000 tons of TNT, not 10. 7 years later, which is nothing, cost a lot of money, we set off the first fusion device, an H-bomb, called Mike, incidentally. It released the energy of 10 million tons of TNT. So you go from 10 to 15,000 to 10 million tons. And the Russians sent off one that was 50 million tons of TNT. The point is, we know how to get to the stars if we want to spend the money. I'm not saying it's the ultimate technology. I'm saying scientific progress comes from doing things differently in an unpredictable way. The future is not an extrapolation of the past. You have to change how you do things. And, you know, what gets to me, having worked on fusion propulsion, fission propulsion, nuclear reactors for space applications, and all the rest of this, is that we tend to forget that if you make enough stupid assumptions, you can prove almost anything is impossible. One quick example, one astronomer in 1941, he was fed up with all the science fiction stuff about going to the moon. That was nonsense, he said. So he published a scientific, in quotes, paper calculating the required initial launch weight of a rocket able to get a man to the moon and back. Legitimate question, how big is it got to be? Pages of equations, he concluded it have to weigh 1,000,000 tons. He was off by a factor of 300 million. Proving if you make enough stupid assumptions, you can prove anything is impossible. So we have reason to be very careful when somebody says something is impossible. I have a whole book of It's Impossible, Isn't It? Was going to be the title, but Science Was Wrong is what the publisher decided on. I like the first one better, but anyway. Let's look at another progression, not only in bombs. Ferdinand Magellan's ship, he didn't make it, but his ship did, went around the planet in 3 years, in 1523. 3 years. 3 years before the mast, you might say. Science fiction writers had going around the world in 80 days in the 19th century. The space station goes around the world in 90 minutes. Progress comes from doing things differently. A second problem I found, I worked under security for 14 years for major companies like GE, GM, Westinghouse, McDonnell Douglas, TRW Systems, Aerojet General Nucleonics. I set a record for working on canceled government-sponsored research and development programs. Not intentionally, you understand. Another one of the false myths is that governments can't keep secrets. 2 astronomers have demonstrated this. Dr. Seth Shostak of the SETI Institute, you know, SETI, that stands for Silly Effort to Investigate, incidentally. That's another story which I've written about in the book. Said you can prove that the government can't keep secrets by how badly FEMA fouled up with Katrina and how poorly the post office is operated. Now, if you can see a connection between either of those things and governments keeping secrets, I sure can't. He didn't mention the CIA, the DIA, the NRO, the NSA, and all those other alphabet soup agencies. Another great astronomer, Dr. Neil deGrasse Tyson, head of Hayden Planetarium, he said the proof that governments can't keep secrets is shown by how much we know about President Clinton's genitalia. Now, if you can figure that one out, you're better than I am. Now, the proof, and I'll show some of this in my lecture Tuesday night, about government cover-up. It's not just an idle concept. If you wish, you can get a hold of 156 top-secret Umbra NSA UFO documents. They're not very interesting because all you can read is one sentence per page. Everything else is whited out, not blacked out. They said that was too impressive on television when I used that. They told me this. And the reason is everything else is sources and methods. 98% sources and methods, and 2% UFOs, but it's filed under UFOs. Come on, that makes no sense. You can get a bunch of CIA, and I'll show some of these too, blacked out UFO documents. So highly redacted that you can read about 6 words per page. And my favorite thing, and it took me 3 years to get this, was one of the CIA UFO documents that says on the top, deny in toto. They couldn't find 6 lousy words to declassify. Something's wrong here. And I have to tell you, 1 minute? Okay, I won't tell you. Maybe I'll tell you that Tuesday night. One more thing. Air Force General Carol Bolender stated that UFO reports which could affect national security, he was asked to look about what we should do about Project Blue Book, are not part of the Blue Book system. UFO reports which could affect national security are not part of the Blue Book system. Incredible statement. I located him, I talked to him on the phone, he verified there are 2 separate reporting channels. He never heard that from the Air Force. His job was to decide what to do about Project Blue Book, and it was canceled because of this memo. But the public never heard that he said, reports which could affect national security are not part of the Blue Book system. People are surprised. Just one more sentence here, 2 sentences. I've won several debates on UFOs. I've only had 11 hecklers and over 700 lectures. It's past time for the press, scientific, and political communities to do their homework. And I should add, at least 3 UFO crashes have occurred. You'll hear more about those later in these hearings. Thank you very much.
Chairman Bartlett and distinguished citizen hearing on disclosure panelists and my hearing colleagues. My name is Linda Moulton Howe. I grew up in Boise, Idaho, where my father, Chet Moulton, was director of aeronautics. One of his friends was Kenneth Arnold, who reported the unidentified flying objects over Mount Rainier in June of 1947. And a local reporter then coined the phrase UFO, unidentified flying objects. I remember my father dismissed the idea of extraterrestrials altogether, and that is the bias with which I grew up. I attended the University of Colorado in Boulder when I earned a cum laude Bachelor of Arts in English Literature, and I went on to Stanford University in California to earn a master's degree in communication, producing documentary films for the Stanford Medical Center. My master's thesis film was about the Stanford Linear Accelerator's first efforts to have computers analyze subatomic particle bombardments. From Stanford, I went to TV news at KNBC in Los Angeles, where my beat was science, environment, and medicine. Later, I was honored at WCVB in Boston as a producer, sharing the station's Peabody Award for Science and Medical Programming Excellence. Then I became Director of Special Projects at the Denver CBS affiliate, KMGH-TV. I produced, wrote, directed, edited, and reported a dozen TV documentaries about several live issues in the Colorado area and produced studio shows about science, medical, and environmental issues that earned 3 regional Emmys, 1 national Emmy nomination, and several other documentary film awards. I stress this only to say that when people address the mainstream media and those that are professionals not paying attention to this very important issue, that is not true. Many of us have tried.